Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. That comes from a poem written by Emma Lazarus that was part of the fundraising for the Foundation for the Statue of Liberty. And the whole poem is titled The New Colossus. And let me put my glasses on. Okay. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning in her name, mother of exiles. From her beacon hand blows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbors 20 cities frame. Keep ancient lands, you storied pomp, cried she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Sounds pretty welcoming, but our history does not, unfortunately, show what that poem says about immigration. I'm going to start, before I give you some figures, with a little background of how my family came to the United States. My parents were both born in Poland, but they were of German descent. My father lived in Warsaw and actually was part of the Polish underground during World War II. My mother lived in a small town across the border of Germany, and their circumstances were very different. My father did not want to talk about what went on in the war, so he said very little. My mother, being a woman, told her stories. Her family was actually quite well off before the war started. Her father was the butcher, the baker, and the grocery store, basically. And so the family ran that. They were a big part of the politics of the town, and they had enough money to educate their children and take good care of their children. And then when the Germans invaded Poland, they were given a choice. You can go to a concentration camp, but since you can prove that you're German and not Jewish, we need workers in Germany. You can pack up and you can move. And so basically my grandparents took their 7 children, which were in their early teens through toddlers. And at first they, could only take what they could carry, and they were going to pack all the food. And my grandfather said, no, we're going to take like 2 days worth of food, and we're going to take all the cigarettes and cigars and tobacco. And according to my mother, they literally traded that tobacco for their needs through most of the war. But they were basically homeless, living, taking care of their kids. My mother would talk about, you used 1 potato for the whole week to make potato soup. You just reboiled it every day and different things. When the war ended, it was basically luck of the draw as to where you were when it ended, as far as how Germany and the different countries were divided between Russia and the rest of the Allies. My mother's oldest sister found herself in what became East Germany, and they never heard from her again. The rest, they took the army barracks and made camps, and housing for displaced persons. My mother said you just kind of put up blankets and divided your little corner. And that's where actually my parents met. They got married. In 1948, the Displaced Persons Act was passed by Congress, and there were literally millions of homeless in Germany after World War II. The United States, under this act, said, we'll take 200,000. Now, what's very interesting about that is, first of all, they had to show that they were self-sufficient and would not become dependent on any aid from the government, which is kind of hard when you don't have a lot. And the other requirement was that you could not immigrate to the United States if you were already a resident in a displaced persons camp, which literally prevented most of the Jewish immigrants and a lot of other displaced people from qualifying. But under this program, which was amended in 1950 to help a little bit, but it still did not take that requirement. If you spent time in a displaced persons camp, you were not eligible to immigrate. This program allowed for 383,542 immigrants came to the United States. That broke down to 47% were Catholic, 35% were Protestant or Greek Orthodox, and only 16% of that number were Jewish. Even before the war began and during the war, millions of Jews died because we would not open our doors. So we have to understand immigration is not something that is a recent problem. It is basically a sorted part of our history as a country. Now, Congress tried to basically change a little bit. So in 1953, they passed the Refugee Relief Act. And that removed the stipulation that people that were once part of a displaced persons camp were not eligible. That is the program under which my parents were able to come to the United States. Now, they applied, to immigrate to the United States in 1948. My sister was born in 1948. While they were waiting and waiting and waiting, my grandmother died. My father's mother, who they were living with, their grandparents. I was born, my brother was born. My father had an accident which disabled him partially. Life kind of went on, but it was limbo. But finally, they found a sponsor. And it was a Methodist church in Islip, New York. So my family boarded a plane. My parents had to save the money for, they had been saving for the plane fare. It was a 4-engine prop plane that went over the ocean, so it was not a nice jetliner. We had to make an emergency stop over Iceland because we lost 2 of those 4 engines. So, as young as I was, that was quite a memory. I remember throwing up all over my father. And I remember us getting off the planes and being given paper bags that contained toothbrushes and toothpaste, and we got to sleep in like an army barracks overnight while they fixed our plane, and then got back on the plane, landed in New York. That Methodist church, I don't remember their name. I do remember the pastor, Pastor Loder, because he became a family friend for life. And my parents always stayed in close contact with him and his family. Now, when you sponsor an immigrant, you have to agree to take care of all of their financial needs for at least the first year. that they are in this country. That means that this church agreed to take care of our medical expenses. Whatever came up, they were financially responsible for our family, which, you know, we're very grateful. I was lucky because the kindergarten teacher was also a member of the church. So I got to go home with her after my half day of kindergarten and spend the afternoon with her while my parents worked, and she helped me with my English. After 6 months, my father got an offer for a job in Chicago from a friend that he knew, and so he hopped the Greyhound bus and went to Chicago and started working and saved some money and bought some ugly furniture that my mother was not happy with. And, you know, he rented an apartment, and 6 months later we showed up, and of course my mother took that same Greyhound bus with us, and which went all through the south side of Chicago before it landed at the station. And, you know, she was ready to get right back on that bus and go back to New York. But we stayed in Chicago, we settled. My parents found a community of immigrants. I grew up as a child in Chicago. Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, all the holidays, we had 30, 40 people. They were all aunts and cousins, and as I got a little older, I started questioning, if we're the only ones here, and the rest of the family is in Germany, how are they all related? Well, it wasn't a blood relationship, but it was a combined experience relationship. And anybody that didn't have family or a place to go, they were always welcome at those gatherings. And so, you know, my cousins and aunts and uncles weren't really cousins and aunts and uncles, but it was a good community, and it countered the difficulties in school. You know, I had pierced ears, and little girls in the United States did not have pierced ears, and I was made fun of, and I had this accent, and, you know, my mother would tell people you're Polish, don't tell them you're German. Because we did wake up sometimes to having swastikas on our sidewalk and Nazi go home. And so it was much more welcome if you were Polish than if you were German. But I got older, my accent went away. I hit high school, and suddenly I was very popular because all my friends, their mothers would not let them pierce their ears. And wow, you have pierced ears. So things change. I was very lucky. I'm a white person. I can assimilate very easily. People of color, it's much more difficult for them to come. Now, the program, the Refugee Relief Act, the total number of people that immigrated under that program were 214,000. Now, just so you understand, you know, on the news, I get this idea that we assume that people are coming to this country because they want a free ride and they want all this aid and they want all this help. If you qualify for a green card, and this is from the government website, okay, a green card fee is $1,540 per person. Wow. Okay, and that green card is good for 10 years. Now, that means if you have a 2-year-old, they need that green card. So you're saving your money trying to come up with that. A work permit is $455. Now, the NPR website gave this figure, and it didn't quite, when I added that all up, I came close, but I was a couple $100 off from their figure. But in 2023, the cost of a family of 4 to get 2 work permits and a green card is $7,270. Okay. So it's not easy. It's a very difficult journey for anybody that wants to be an American. And we are, our policies are not helpful. I have to tell you, it took me about 3 hours to find on the government website those figures even on what it costs. Citizenship costs, now this is a little bit more practical. In 1965, when my family finally became naturalized citizens, they paid $680 per person for our family to become citizens. Plus there's tests and other requirements. It's not an easy process. Citizenship cost today is $725. So that hasn't gone up quite as much as green cards. Now what's very interesting is anybody that was born in the United States and you need your birth certificate, what does it cost you to get a replacement when you can't find it in your drawer? Anybody got an idea?
$62.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
$62.
$62 to get a new birth certificate? Okay. If you lose your citizenship papers, it costs you $455 to get a new one,
Wow.
to get a replacement.
Wow.
Now, I unfortunately, back in the 90s, misplaced my citizenship papers and found that my passport was expired by over 6 months. And so then you have to apply for a new one. So I assumed I needed my citizenship papers. And I was in a panic. And I went down to the INS office in Chicago at the Daily Center. And my friend said, now you gotta get there early, I'm like, why? And they're like, no, they only let so many people in every day. So the office opened at 9 a.m. I got there at 6 a.m. with my umbrella in a cold, rainy Chicago day, and I stood out there. When I got there at 6 a.m., the line was already around the block.
Whoa.
Now, at 9 a.m., they came out and started handing out numbers to everybody in line. About 8 people behind me also got a number. And I thought, well, finally, okay. So now I get in the building. And I think this isn't too bad. I sit there and wait for my number to be called. As I'm sitting there, I was appalled at the treatment of the people that came to that building by the guards. If you had a child with you, they had to stay in that seat. If they got up, you were threatened with being kicked out of the building, and I kept saying, we don't treat Americans like this, And of course, I was a citizen. I felt like, this isn't right. It's interesting because over the weekend I was hearing reports on the news that everybody's all up in arms because it takes you 6 months now to get a passport. So finally, at 2 p.m., they called my number. And I got in line. And they asked me why I was there, and I explained why I was there. They gave me another number. And I sat back down. An hour later, they called that number. And, I told them why I was there, and they said, well, you can replace your document for $455. I think actually it was a little more at the time. Or we can get you a certified photocopy of your original document for $65. And I thought, that's not too bad. So I paid the $65. And then she told me, you can expect that in the mail in about 6 months.
Oh.
And I went home and I was like, I got on the phone to the passport office. I don't know what to do. And she's like, oh, relax. We can check your status in 24 hours. Just come on down. And I went, okay. But that was an eye-opening experience because I was really appalled at the way we were treating people that were quote unquote not Americans in that building. And I don't know if that goes on today, but I would assume it's not any better. Now, the ELCA has a very nice document on their website, which I encourage everybody to read, on where our church stands on immigration. As Christians, we need to look at how would Christ treat immigrants. You know, I don't know all the answers, but there has to be a change in our immigration policy. Our policies are so convoluted, they're very difficult for people to understand. You know, I'm not going to take a stand on illegal or legal immigration, but I'll tell you, my family wanted a life for their family, and they thought coming here was the answer. They worked very hard to get here. They worked very hard when they got here. They made a lot of sacrifices. They were very proud. My parents learned English. They were proud to be here. I don't think the average immigrant, whether they're legal or illegal, is out to rob and rape and hurt other people. They just want to give their families the same opportunities we're able to give ours. And we need to talk to our lawmakers about coming up with a solution that is humane. These are Jesus. You know, these people, you know, that could be that angel of God that you meet, that you turned your back on or you help. So I'll open it up to questions.
I have one thing to say about
Okay.
that. I just wanted to let you know that I think it's kind of important that we as members of the Lutheran Church kind of look into this document on our own Synod website and be more aware of it. I was at the Simon's Project, a meeting just the other day, and they said one of the biggest issues that they're trying to deal with now from our Synod, Grand Canyon Synod, is how do we present Jesus as immigrant, because that's what Jesus was. And if we have that view and we start to apply how we feel, we'll understand it better. And so I just wanted to mention that because it came up just 2 days ago that this is one of the goals, to preach Jesus as immigrant.
Yes, and I think Glenn had an experience that he'd like to share with us as well.
I realized I would have been a little more prepared, but as a pastor, through our synod, I did an immersion experience across the border in Nogales. You probably do not know this, but our synod supports basically a resettlement shelter, I guess, in Mexico. And what happens is, and I went across there and I saw a couple of settlements, and what happens is, if you're going to immigrate to the United States in the proper fashion, you come up to the border, Mexico, United States border, and you put your name down, and then you have to wait in order to be called. And that wait can be 2 to 4 months. So what do you do while you're doing that is that we support a shelter. Actually, when you give money in your offering plate, you are partially supporting that shelter. And the shelter is run by the people. Even the little kids have a job, everybody has a job, they got to do their own cooking, they got to do all that. What happens is, now the rules could change 3 years ago, but this is the process that happens. And some comments by lay people, and then I know open it up to other people. But over the years, people have said to me, well, why don't they go through the system and become natural citizens. They should just do it the proper way instead of trying to sneak across the border. Well, who has $7,000 to do that? We're talking people in poverty. The second thing so it's not an issue. The second thing is we really fail, which is what you're getting at, to understand the life situations that people are coming from. So I talked to this one young adult. He was maybe 25. He had a business in Venezuela of selling that country. He had a little side street business, and he couldn't stay there anymore because he spoke out against the policies of the government. So he saved money, flew in an airplane up to some place in Mexico, was able to get to this shelter, and now he sits there and waits. He's very well dressed. He dressed better than I did. And so you start talking to the people. So what happens then, if you apply, then the way it happens nowadays is that if you apply, and if you have a family member, they will send you to that family member in the United States until you get your court hearing. Okay? And that court hearing could be 1 or 2 years. Okay? And while they're doing that, they can't work.
What?
And so they have to live. That's why they're bussed all over the place, because they're bussed to be with family people. And what happens is how you become undocumented. Many of them, they come through that system, and they can't wait. After a while, they just say, I'm done dealing with the system. I'm going to become undocumented. So that's a little bit of a short, very condensed thing about that experience. So there you go.
Thank you. Okay, anybody have questions? Yes.
Do you remember all your different languages?
Actually, my parents were very adamant that we speak only English because they needed to practice their English, and we did too. But my mother did send us to school on Saturday for 4 hours every Saturday morning to learn German until about 1.5 years. She showed up early one day and realized we weren't really learning German. And she got very angry and just kind of yelled at some things at the teacher, and we never went back. My parents assumed we forgot, and we spoke both Polish and German before we came to the United States. They assumed we forgot, and us being 3 very industrious children, we let them believe that, because when they wanted to have a conversation they didn't want us to hear, they just switched either to German or Polish. And of course one day my dad said something a little bit off color, and my sister laughed, and they realized that we were understanding what they were saying. It's been a long time. When I go back to Germany, I can speak German if I need to, and I speak it well enough that they don't laugh at me. They say, how long have you been out of Germany? So at least they understand what I'm saying, and I can get myself around the country, and about half of my cousins speak English and the other half don't, and I can communicate if I need to. But I think the difference is because I was young enough that I never learned to read or write in German, just in English. I think in English. Even when I'm in Germany, I think in English, and then I translate in my head before it comes out. That's a interesting experience for me, because I realize when I go to Germany that my parents, even as many years as they were in this country, they always thought in German and translated in English in their head. So, but yeah, I can. Yes?
Could you help us understand the difference between a migrant and a refugee?
Okay, well, a migrant is somebody that immigrates through the process, and we have all sorts of rules. If you go out, it's very convoluted to try to figure it out as to who's allowed. If you marry an American citizen, you're allowed to immigrate. We have quotas from every country, and part of that quota, you have to prove that you can take care of yourself when you get here and different things of that sort. A refugee is somebody that basically, for one reason or another, no longer has a home, usually because of war or persecution or, and the rules are slightly different, but unfortunately, with the exception of through history, some programs like we had after World War II and a few others, and after Saigon fell, there was a program for Vietnam refugees and things. Our programs are not really helpful for refugees. We don't live in the real world when we come up with these rules and expect people to be able to follow them. I believe in following laws. I also believe laws should be fair.
I think most people don't know this, but when I talk about the people down in the border, those would be, you could classify them as refugees, but they're migrants. The refugees are often, we have Lutheran immigration, something, whatever that is. They're dealing mostly with refugees. And does anybody here know who sets how many refugees are allowed in the United States?
Congress.
The president. The president sets the announcement, and interestingly enough, without getting into too much politics, Lutheran Immigration Services was furious because when Trump became president, he lowered the amount of refugees that were allowed to come into the United States. Okay, but it's the president that sets it, and it's not a huge amount. We're talking, somewhere between 75,000 and 150,000, something like that.
So, under the new administration, has that been readjusted? Or is it still the same?
Pardon me?
Is it still the same amount, or?
I
Did
think Biden raised it a little bit,
Yeah.
but it's still not a huge number. When you're talking millions of refugees, it's not a huge number.
I think to put that in perspective, the Ukraine war has created millions of refugees, and Poland, a country about the size of one of our states, is taking in millions and caring for millions of refugees from that war. The numbers, and when you go through a refugee program, and like the president says, we're going to take these many refugees, what you don't understand is that number comes off of the quota from that country for however many years it takes. So, for example, around World War II, the quota for Germans was 30,000 a year. Those 400,000 refugees that they took through those different programs after World War II, they took up that quota for calculate how many years forward for anybody wanting to immigrate from Germany.
I have one more question.
Sure.
That's
You got here in about 48, 49, and you didn't naturalize until 65. Was that because there was so much volume to go through the naturalization process?
No, cost.
Oh, okay.
It costs money. And plus you have to study for the tests and things like that. My parents were raising 3 children. They were working, they were going to night school. Yeah, I think that time you could become a citizen after 5 years. but most people can't do it that way because of cost.
Some lives are in danger. How long can you wait there? You know, thank you so much for showing up. I know that the second service is beginning soon, and I just thought, wouldn't it be an interesting topic? I've thought about this for days, to consider the impact that immigrants have in making capitalism possible. I thought that would be an interesting thing to consider, because so much of our workforce is gone now, as immigrants are less and less, and I keep thinking, wouldn't that be a topic to research?
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.